practice, right? The tolerances are really tight, they're sensitive, they're not robust like a recip engine, right? So they're easy to like talk about, but hard to get working, if that makes sense, right? Okay. So, you know, engine theory, suck, squeeze, bag, blow. Everybody knows that, right? So, let's talk about it. First, you have your intake, right? And this is where the air gets sucked in, right? Huge amounts of air gets pulled into here. Now, as the engine runs forward, you have ram air effect, right? That assists putting air into the engine through the inlet, right? Through this intake. This also where you'd find your particle separators and stuff like that, pull out like anything that could damage the engine, because they're very sensitive, right? So you go to inlet, and then you come into the compressor section, right? And in this compressor section, what does it do? Next stage, squeeze, right? So as you look at this compressor section, the room gets smaller, but the amount of air is the same, right? As you move back. The amount is the same, but the area is smaller, so it gets compressed, right? So you want to keep high pressure, right? What happens to air when it speeds up?
Up.
What's that?
It's up and expand.
When air speeds up, like going through a Venturi, the pressure goes down, right? That defeats the purpose. So as these compressor blades are spinning, they're going to start a vortex and speed up the air, and that goes against what we want, right? So you want to slow the air down. You want to slow it down. So that's why you have the stators, right? They stay in place. They don't move. That's how I remember what they're called, stators. They stay, right? So what they do is they redirect the air to straighten it back out so it doesn't vortex, right? It doesn't spin around. So it slows the air down, right? So you have more pressure, right? You want high pressure, low speed to get, so when you get to the end, right, you have the most pressure possible. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we have compressed air. Now remember, like all the stuff we used to talk about, like with like cabin atmosphere, where you have to cool the air because now you're compressing it, it's getting hot, right? So you have hot compressed air, right? And this is where your bleed air comes from, is back here, right? Because it's clean air at a high pressure, right? And you can use it for other things. But just remember, this is where your bleed air comes from, this side of the compressor, right? After it leaves the compressor, then you go into the diffuser. And you can see inside here, the diffuser, right? What the diffuser does is it directs the vast majority of the air around the combustion section, right? So it's used for cooling, to cool that combustion section. Only allows some air into the combustion section, right? It's only like 10-20% of the air is actually used for combustion, right? So now you have compressed air. What do you need next? Fuel, right? And you can see the fuel nozzles inside there, right? And they spray the fuel, atomize it, right? Like a spray, right? Increases the surface area of the fuel, right? So you get a better combustion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So now all you need to do is just light this fuel. And our igniters, right, that are up here, oh, that's a fuel. So anyways, the igniter ignites the fuel, right, and gets it burning. Once it starts the burn, it shuts off and you don't need them again. It sustains the fire, right, like a blowtorch. right? Once it gets lit, it stays lit. You know what I'm saying? Right? So igniters burn hotter, and they'll burn themselves out really quick and really easy if they keep igniting, right? So once you get the light, it gets lit, and it stays lit, the igniters shut off, and that's it, right? Kind of like a diesel engine, where a diesel engine doesn't use a spark plug. It just uses pressure, right? Heat and pressure. Once this gets lit, it's lit. All right? So now that you have this fuel, air, high pressure going on here, what happens? Heat expands, right? So now it's even hotter than up here, right? Because this hot air is actually cooling this down to keep this from melting, right? Your combustion section, keep it from melting. So now the fuel, this expansion, this heat expansion increases its velocity, right? Now you want this velocity to come back and turn your turbine engines, right? When they also have stators to redirect the flow, right, to optimize the angle at which it hits your turbine, right, to leak out as much power out of it as possible, right? And so now this is generating your power, your turbine section, right? This heat expansion is pushing on your turbine, providing your power, and then it is connected to a drive shaft that then runs your compressor, completing the cycle. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we have your complete cycle. Does that make sense? So you have your intake sucking in air, your compressor compressing said air. Remember, low velocity, high pressure. Come back here in your combustion section, add your fuel, mix, and then you go from high pressure, low velocity to the other way around, where you have low pressure, high velocity, right? And that drives and then repeats the cycle. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, another thing to remember is if this is a single stage, right? You have just this turbine running this compressor, right? This is your N and this is your T, right? If you have multiple stages, you would have like a T1 and a T2, and then an N1 and an N2. Remember, the N1, the T1 drives your N1, your T2 drives your N2, right? And the ones are the closest inboard to the middle, right? And then the twos are outside of that, right? Does it make sense? Because you can't, it's impossible to have this one, the first one drive the first one over there, because how are you going to transfer that power, right? Because this drive shaft is hollow if you're having that set up, and then the other drive shaft goes through the center of that drive shaft to power the one out there. Just so you guys remember in your head that the T1 drives the N1, the T2 drives the N2, and the ones are the closest in. And so think about it this way: if you have double stages, it's like two engines, right? So here's your first engine, and then you want to stack the second engine on. You stack that turbine on there, and then stack the next turbine on, the next compressor out there. Does that make sense?
So there's another drive shaft inside there?
Not on this one, but yes, if there was multiple stages, yes. Any questions?
How does the turbine work?
Turbine, it gets pushed by the expanding air, right? Because the heat is making it expand, right? So now you have the pressure increases, but your velocity is increasing too as well, right? So where do you think the highest pressure inside this engine is then?
Compressor.
It's right here at the end of the compressor, right? Because if there's more pressure here in your combustion section, it would push that way as well as that way, right? Because there's higher pressure, it's going to move towards any low pressure. So you have more pressure here than you do back here. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Anybody? Pretty simple in theory, right? Pretty simple in theory. That's literally it.